everyone, welcome to our channel Knowledge of Friends. Subscribe to our channel and click the bell icon for the latest update. As you know, आज हम जो क्लास करने वाले हैं वो ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम की क्लास करेंगे एंड ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम की ये क्लास नंबर 22th क्लास है जो कि हमने ऑलरेडी 21th क्लास कर लिया है. And hopefully this class will be the last class of operating system where we will discussed actually we had discussed unit 1 and unit 2, unit 3, unit 4 and as well as unit 5 आज की क्लास में हम कंप्लीट कर लेंगे. एंड फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, अगर आप हमारा चैनल फर्स्ट टाइम देख रहे हो या अभी तक आपने हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है, इट्स अ ह्यूज रिक्वेस्ट कि आप हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करो सो दैट हम जो भी वीडियोस डालें वो आपके पास सबसे पहले पहुंचे. एंड सेकेंडली, अगर आप हमारा वीडियो अभी तक चैनल सब्सक्राइब नहीं कर पाए हो तो प्लीज़ सब्सक्राइब करो. Moving ahead with the topic that we had left before, हमने जिससे पहले disadvantages of mounting and advantages of mounting के बारे में डिस्कस किया था, जहाँ पे file system, before mounting file system, the structures of the pen drive, that what we had discussed about. Now today we'll discuss about the free space management here. And with regard of that free space management, we have to start with knowing the difference between the linked list and the bitmap approach here. For the linked list here, if I'm talking about, so the linked list states that in a linked list all free space disk blocks are linked. जितने भी आपके linked list होते हैं उसमें जितने भी आपके free space disk होंगे वो आपके blocks link होंगे one to another and keep a pointer to the first free block. और आपका जो first free block होंगे उनके ऊपर वो pointer point करेंगे and as well as in a special location on a disk and catching it in a memory. Where in the terms of this method has a negligible space overhead because there is no need for a disk allocation table, merely for a pointer to the beginning of that chain basically, and the length of the first portion. This method is suited to all the file allocations method here. Now we'll discuss about the bitmap approach for the free space memory management. In regard of the bitmap here, so that this method uses of a vector containing one bit for each block. यहाँ पे इस मेथड में जो आपका वेक्टर होता है वो आपका एक बिट कंटेन करता है हर एक ब्लॉक के लिए ऑन अ डिस्क. And each entry of a 0 corresponds to a free block and each 1 corresponds to a block in the use. And basically for this for example, we are considering a disk where the blocks we have here is your 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 and then 9 and then 10, 11, 12, 13, 17, 18, 25, 26 and 27. These were the free. These are free and the rest of the blocks are allocated. So the free space map would be that we can say in along to it, okay, 1 1 0 0 0 0 1 1 0 0 0 0 0 0 and then 1 1 1 0 0 and then again we have 1 here, 1 and then 1 1 1 1 and then 0 0 and 0, this and so on. These main advantages of this method is that is relatively easy to find one and contiguous group here with regard of the bitmap approach if I'm talking about, where that a free block. And even the second advantages is that it is as small as possible and can kept in memory as well. Now with regard of this, we'll move ahead with another topic, and that what we have to discuss is your implementation of access matrix. Access matrix का कैसे implementation होता है? With regard of the access matrix information, this is the protection mechanism apart, where the access control matrix is implemented by using the 4 different methods, and these 4 different methods we have is global table, access list for the object capability list, and the lock key mechanism. In the global table if I'm talking about, so here in the global table consists of the 3 parameters, that is your the 3 parameters are domain and as well as object and write set. These were the 3 3 parameter what they are performing in the global table here. Before performing operation on an object by subject in particular domain, the global table is searched for the triple, and that is the domain, objects and the write sets here. If this is found, the operation is performed, otherwise error condition is generated here. Okay, if this were not performed, so the error generated comes under the global table here. With regard of this, the drawbacks of global table, we can say that the global table cannot keep in main memory because of the large size होता है, इसलिए हम उसे main memory में नहीं रख पाते हैं, and it requires the additional input output operation as well in the global table here. So this is the drawback of global table. Now we'll discuss about the capability list. And the capability list is used for controlling the device and the files. An object is often represented by its physical name or an address that is called its capability here. In the capability is a pointer or a token that grants privileges to a subject that process, and it is then implemented as a unique object identifier. Capabilities are granted to a subject, and which presents a token for all the subsequent access to the object. And in terms of the capability list, each capability grants the owner certain certain rights on a certain object, and capability lists are themselves the objects and may point it to from that other capability list as well. In regard of this, the token-based and the pointer-based capabilities are used in the system, and the pointer-based capabilities simply to the address to which the object is stored, and the token-based capabilities. The first is the pointer-based capability, that is your that it simplifies, like we can just write it down here that the capabilities are the two types, and that is your pointer base capabilities, and this is your token based capabilities. So in the pointer based capabilities here, that it simplifies the address at which the object is stored, and the token based capabilities, that is the capabilities are independent for the object location in memory. And upon these creations of an object of a capability for an object is to be created, the capability provide the two functions. The first function is your it provides very large address space for the resource. ये अपना बहुत large address space provide करता है for that particular resource. And the second function is your possessions of the capability represent the authentication of the subject of a particular object here. Now with regard of this, the capability list, we will discuss about some of the implementations of capabilities. What were the implementations of capabilities to be performed? And the first is your it is implemented within the operating system address space, and the second is the hardware may incorporate specialized support for that capabilities. And if I'm talking about the much more about implementation of capabilities, so that match operating system provides a kernel level capabilities, and the capabilities allow a person to encapsulate it easily, and do not support selective revocations of the types here. Okay, and with this lock key mechanism we will discuss, that is the fourth one, and that is the implementation of the access matrix as well. The lock key mechanism, if I'm talking about, so here the lock key is a unique bit pattern for each object, and this for the lock, if I'm talking about, so this is a unique bit pattern. This is unique bit pattern for each object, and the keys each domain has a list of the unique bit pattern here. When talking about the lock key mechanism here, so when a block of memory is allocated to a process, the lock is as set that the same as the process key as well, and the process key and the memory lock that can set only while the system is a supervisor mode, and that is the access is checked by the hardware on each memory access by keeping the key value in the CPU register as well. So memory locks can be throw off as an access control list, and the value of that lock and the key is the same, then only accessing of object is allowed, and where this method is simple to implement, and it is efficient at runtime as well. Now we'll discuss the another point, another topic that we have, and that is also an important one. With regard of this, we'll discuss the file system protection. फाइल सिस्टम प्रोटेक्शन क्या होता है, जिसे हम FSP भी बोलते हैं. वैसे तो ज़्यादातर FSP या फिर फाइल सिस्टम प्रोटेक्शन करके ही पूछा जाता है. ये बहुत बार पूछा गया है एग्जामिनेशन पेपर में, और वो भी आपके 10 नंबर में पूछा गया है, तो दैट इज़ ऑल्सो एन इम्पॉर्टेंट वन हियर. So file system protection, before starting with this, we know some of the things here in the related to the file system protection here. So the things that what we have to know is the protection mechanism are implemented in operating system to support द वेरियस सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसीज। तो जो ये आपका प्रोटेक्शन मैकेनिज्म जो हम यूज़ करते हैं, फाइल सिस्टम प्रोटेक्शन मैकेनिज्म्स, ये ऑपरेटिंग सिस्टम में इसलिए इम्प्लीमेंट होता है कि हम सपोर्ट कर सकते हैं कुछ सिक्योरिटी पॉलिसीज़ को। विद रिगार्ड ऑफ दैट, द कंप्यूटर सिस्टम कंसिस्ट ऑफ द हार्डवेयर एंड द सॉफ्टवेयर रिसोर्सेज एंड हार्डवेयर रिसोर्सेज दैट कंपोनेंट्स आर सीपीयू, main memory, basically segment, keyboard, mouse, printer, and the disk drives here. And the software resources or software components are that processes like file, database, semaphores, and these are all the components that are called object here in reference to the file system protection here. With regard of this only, we can say that the unique name is assigned to each object. This name is referred whenever any operations is performed on an object, and read and write operations is performed on the files here, where the objects must be protected from the subjects. And then access right is define how various subjects can access various objects subjects, and subjects may be users, processes, program, etc. And we can say that the subjects are active entities and the objects are passive here. With regard of the protection domain, as you can gone through, see, you can see here, the protection domain is a collection of access right. protection domain जो होता है वो आपका एक collection है access right का. The protection state can be conceptualized, आपका जो प्रोटेक्शन स्टेट है वो कंसेप्शलाइज्ड हो सकता है एज एन एसेस मैट्रिक्स, एंड ईच एसेस मैट्रिक्स इज अ प्रोटेक्शन डोमेन are represented as an order pair with the field for an object name and its corresponding privileges. This is a diagram here where the domain 1 has been represented, that is sorting dot c, that is the rw, and that is payroll dot c, that is rwx here. And this is a domain 1, and here this is the domain 2, and the domain 3 is intersecting, like abc.txtr and maths.xlsrw, and printer, that the print w here only for the domain 2 and the domain 3 as well. The sal dot docs, that is w, and the pay dot xls, that is rwx, and that is abc dot text, that is domain 3 here. This is the protection domain. With regard of the protection domain and as well as the protection mechanism, file protection mechanism we discussed here, that a protection domain are the extensions of the hardware and the supervisor mode ability. And the protection domain is a unique to an object, and then a domain is a set of like objects and rights pair, and each pair specifies an object and some subsets of the operation that can be performed on it. And for example, if the user can read and write the file, like sorting c, and that the file corresponding ordered pair for that user's access right can be represented by the sorting dot c, that read write जो कि यहाँ पे लिखा हुआ है. Okay, and for that case we can say that this were the three protections domain, that the association between the domain and the process, and the statics and the dynamic as well. And that static means that the set of the available resource for the users fixed through process lifetime, and at an every instant of the time each process runs in the some protection domain. And that process can also move from one domain to the other domain, and during the execution, as well as that rules for the domain switching are highly system dependent. An access right may be copied, transferred, or propagated from one domain to another, and that copying of that access right simply granting a right of one user to the another user. And when this subject is no longer needs to access to an object, the access rights can be revoked here. In terms of the file system protection, if I'm talking about, so here with the Unix, in a Unix operating system, the process domain is defined by the using UID and the GID, that is given by UID and the GID combination, and it is possible to make a complete list of an object that can be accessed, and the two subjects with the same UID and the GID combination will have an access is exactly same sets of object here. With regard of this, if I'm talking about, each file management system has its own method to control file access, and the four most commonly used methods are as follows, like first is access control matrix, access control list, capability list, and the lock word list. These were the four file management system that has owned method to control the file control file access. Yeah, the most commonly used methods that we have is the access control matrix and the access control list and the capability list, as well as the lock word lock word control here. In regard of that, we'll move ahead and we'll discuss some of the short answer possible questions that is important, and with regard of that they had asked in the examination paper as well. So we'll discuss about the responsibilities of a file manager here, and the reference to the responsibilities of the file manager. The responsibilities of a file manager is a creation. File manager का responsibility होता है creation करना, delete करना, modify करना, control access to a file, and it is also provides the support for the libraries of the programs to online users for spooling operations and for the interactive computing. File manager is responsible for the maintenance of the secondary storage as well. In regard of this, if I'm talking about the attributes of a file, and attributes of a file, if someone asks you about the right attributes of the file, or what are the attributes of file here. So file attributes are पहला attribute है name, size, type, location, protection, time and date. These were the attributes of file that what you have to answer. Now we'll discuss more further, that is log structured file. Log structured file क्या होते हैं, that what we have to discuss here. And the log structured file are those that a log structured file system is a file system in which data and metadata are written sequentially, जिसमें data और metadata जो होता है वो आपका sequentially लिखा होता है, and to a circular buffer that is called a log here. With regard of this, if I'm talking about here, with moving ahead with the further, so some of the things that what we have to discuss here in regard of this only, and with the conclusion with the concept that what we are discussing here. So here the another topic is an example of a situation when a variable size records would be useful. With regard of this, if I'm talking about here, okay, in terms of this, if I'm talking about, so here the examples, we have a text file with each record containing a line of text. So this was known as the examples of a situation where the variable size records would be useful. Now moving ahead with another topic, and that is your content of typical file control block. The content of typical file control block था, उसका क्या content था, basically what is the content of the typical file content control block here, that what we'll discuss here. And for that, control of content of a file control block depends upon the operation system, and it controls the file name, location of a file on a secondary storage, and the length of a file, date and time, and that creation has been, and the last access as well. Now the data type, we'll discuss. The data type is a file. क्या data type file है? Yes, a file is an abstract data type only, so we can just say that yeah, a file is an abstract data type here. Now we'll move ahead with the further, and before that we will discuss some of the things as well, and then what are the access list and the file permissions. So let's start with that. So before starting with the access control list and the file permissions here, so with regard of that, some of the question that has been asked, like given examples of an application that could be benefited from the operating system that support from the random access to indicate a file. So for that, you can answer that an application that maintaining a database of entire, that entries that could benefit from such support. So for instance, if the program is maintaining a student database, and then access to the database cannot be modeled by any any that a predetermined access pattern, and the accesses to record are random, and that obvious that they are locating the records would be more efficient, and if the operating systems were to be provide some form of the trees based indexed here. Or the question that what they can ask you, that name the entries that make up the file control block, that is FCB. So you can just say that FCB contains the information, that is file control block contain that information about the file, including the ownership and the permission, and as well as the location of the file content as well. Now we'll discuss about the access control, the list and the file permissions here. In a multi-users operating system, a file may be accessed by the multiple user. Multiple जो आपके operating systems होते हैं, multi-user operating system होते हैं, वो आपका use कर सकते हैं. They can access by multiple user as well. The permission right associated with the directories and the files are used to protect or restrict access to a file In the Unix, these rights are known as read, write, and create. In the Unix system, if I'm talking about, these rights are known as read, write, and create as well. In regard of this, read, write, and execute, of course. And these with regard of this, if I'm talking about, if they had asked you about what are the functions of the file organization module in a file system, you can answer that a file organization module can translate logical block address to a physical block address, and for a basic file system to transfer as well, that you can answer. And with regard of that, the another question they can ask you in the 2 marks possible question, that discuss about the file descriptor access or a control, that is access a control matrix. So in that you can write it down that protection mechanism provide the control access by limiting the types of a file access that can be made, and even the functions can be viewed that abstractly as a matrix, and that is called as access control matrix. And a file descriptor is indexed into a small table of an open file, and for that process, and the descriptor is at it that is the seldom get higher than 6 or 7 of a typical program, that is depending upon the maximum number of the simultaneous open files here. So now we'll discuss more further, and that is the another question, that is essentials requirement for the long-term information storage. Essential requirements for long-term information storage that we have is that the name, the type, the location, the size, protections, and time and date for a file. These were the essential requirements for the long-term information storage here. Now we deal with another one, that is solution for a bad block प्रॉब्लम इन द फाइल सिस्टम. बैड ब्लॉक प्रॉब्लम जो हमें फेस करने को मिलती है, उसके लिए क्या सॉल्यूशंस हम निकाल सकते हैं. For that we have an operating system tries to read logical blocks 87. So operating system that tries to read logical block operating system block 87, that is the first point. The second point is the controller executes the ECC and the finds that the sector is bad. It reports this finding to the operating system. And the third one is next time the system is rebooted, a special command is run to tell that SCSI controller to replace the bad sector with that spay. And as well as the fourth one we have, and not the least as well, after that, whenever the system requests a logical block 87, the request is translated into the replacement sector address by the controller here. So these were the 4 essential requirements for the long-term information storage here. Now we will move ahead with another one, and that is what are links and unlinked directory operation. So let's go ahead with link directory operation. Link directory operation क्या होता है, that link a file to a new name is a file system directory structure. Creating a new directory entry forces executing the node here. This is the link directory operation. And unlink directory operation that we have is it removes the directory entry for a file. Directory entry जो होता है ये remove करता है file से. Now we'll move ahead with another one, and that is also an important one to discuss here. So here the various file accessing methods we have is a sequential access, direct and as well as index, etc. In reference to that, attributes of file पूछ सकते हैं, that is as I told you startingly, that a name, identifier, type, location, size, time and date. And if they had asked you about the difference between difference absolute path from the relative path, if you have to difference between absolute path and relative path, you can just say that an absolute path name begins at the root and follow a path down to a specified file and giving the directory names on the path, and the relative path name defines the path from the current directory. That is the difference between, that is the main difference between the absolute path and the relative path. Next I will discuss the 2 types of the system directories that we have. The 2 types of system directory, we have a tree structured directory that allows that a user to create subdirectories to organize for the files, and the general graph structure that allows the complete flexibility to a file sharing in the files of directory. Now we'll discuss some of the another point, that is your garbage collection. Garbage collection क्या होता है, like garbage collection is a process of automatically freeing objects that are no longer referenced by the program, जो no longer रहते नहीं ज़्यादातर they are not belonging to that particular program, that the garbage collection that removes that. Okay, so here with regard of that we will start discussing about the logical here. And that is logical structure of the directory. What is the logical structure of directory here? So the logical structure of the directory, the most common schemes for defining the logical structures of the directory, as you can see, there are the five type of logical structure directory. The first is the single level directory, the second is the two level directory here, third is three structured directories, and the fourth is acyclic graph directories, and the fifth one is the general graph directory here. In regard of that, if they had asked you about the mention the major attributes of the operations of a file, so you can just say that the major attributes of a file is name, identification, type, location, size, and protection. And operation on a file is to create, a read, a write, and repositions, delete, and as well as the truncate file here. If they ask you what is meant by the free space management, you can just answer that free space management states that to keep the record of the free disk space, and that the system maintain a free space list as well. And free space list is record all of free disk block, that is those are not allocated to a some file or a directory. And in other cases, if the question they can ask you that the mention two main approaches to identify the reuse of for the memory area to keep track it. And for that sake, we have a two criteria, that is the two popular technique to identify the free memory areas as a result of allocation and the deallocation is a heap here. That is, the first is your for that sake, first we have is your reference count. Okay, so first is your reference count, and the second we have a garbage collection, and the first is your reference count and the second is garbage collection. Reference count क्या होता है, that the system associates a reference count with each memory area to indicate the number of the active users. And the garbage collection, in this technique, the two passes are made over the memory to identify the unused area. And the two main approaches to reuse a free memory area in a heap are, that is your first, as I told you, that is your first fit, and the second is your best fit here. The first fit is the allocation of the first hole, that is big enough, and the best fit is the allocation the smallest hole, that is the big enough here. And now we'll discuss that they can ask you name the four common files. And the four common files type we have as the file type are like text, source file, object file, and the executable file here as well. Now we'll discuss some of the points, and that is your the another one, that is the objectives for a file management system. The objectives of file management systems are as follows. The first is that meet the data management needs and the requirement of the user. Basically वो need को complete करता है data management के, and as well as that guarantee that the data in the file the valid, जो भी ये guarantee भी करता है कि जो data है file में वो valid है. Third is optimize performances, आप optimize करता है performance को. Fourth is provide input output support for variety of the storage devices types, and the fifth is provide input output support for the multiple user as well. In regard of this, if I'm talking about that what we had discussed, and with regard of that, they can ask you what is meant by the mounting of file. So where you can say that the mounting of a file system means that taking that storage and connecting it and to the operating system, that is in a way that is usable as an hierarchical storage devices with the directories and the files. And that could be the initial file system for another file system, and that converts the root file system at a mount point as well. And even though they can ask you what is the file management system, in that we can say that the file management system consists of file utility program, that is known as privilege application, and the way a user or application may access files and the programs does not need to develop the file system software as well. The another question they can rise it up, and that is your what are the most common schemes for defining the logical structures for the directory. They can then you can say that for that sake that it requires a cleaning a daemon to produce the clean space, and which take additional CPU time, and reads that are not handled by the buffer cache and are same as the performance as normal file as well. And in regard of that, as that we'll discuss the another point, and that as you can see that is the objective operation that can be performed on a file here. that what we have to discuss here. And with regard of that, we have the another point, that is your create a file create करते हैं, writing a file write करते हैं file को, delete a file delete करते हैं file को, reading a file read करते हैं file को, and then report repositioning within a file, reposition करते हैं अपने file को. These were the different operations that can be performed on a file, and they can ask you what are the various methods for free space management. So you can see, so here for that the various methods for the free space management, we can see that the bit vector, I can just write it down, you can just write it down like bit vector and a linked list here, and then we have a grouping and accounting as well. So these were the four various methods that free up space management here. Now we'll discuss more further with a reference to the another one, and that is in terms of the NFS. NFS or VDS क्या होता है, that what you have to understood, and they can ask you by the 2 marks as well here. Here in terms of NFS, NFS का full form होता है, N stands for network, F stands for file, S stands for system. So network file system. In network file system, the network file system, that is NFS here, and it's probably the most prominent network services using the RPC, and it allows you to access the files in the remote or host in exactly the same way you would access local files, and a mixture of kernels support and the user space demands on the client side, and along with the NFS servers on the server side makes this possible. And this file access is completely transparent to the client. The work across a variety of the servers and the host architecture as well. Now we'll discuss about the VDS, that is virtual file system, and some virtual VFS भी बोलते हैं, but VDS ज़्यादातर बोलते हैं, that is virtual file system here, that provide an object oriented way of implementing the file system, that is VFS allows the same systems call interface to be used for the different types of the file system here. In terms of that, as of now that we had completed unit 5, but some of the question what they had asked you that in the competition in the respect to the examination paper, so जितने भी possible questions पूछते हैं आपके सिलेबस के कंक्लूडिंग, तो मैंने वो सारे आपको करा दिए ऑलरेडी. उसमें कुछ क्वेश्चंस होते हैं जो कि मोस्टली अकर्ड होते हैं, तो मैंने वो भी आपको बता दिया है. फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, अगर आप हमारे चैनल फर्स्ट टाइम देख रहे हो या अभी तक आपने हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है, इट्स अ ह्यूज रिक्वेस्ट कि आप हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करो, सो दैट हम ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा वीडियो डालें और आप ज़्यादा से ज़्यादा उसका यूटिलाइजेशन भी कर सकें. तो जो मोस्ट ऑफली पूछा जाता है, जो भी लेटेस्ट 2015 और 2016 में पूछा भी गया था, दैट इज़ व्हाट इज़ नीड ऑफ द फाइल प्रोसेस कंट्रोल ब्लॉक, पीसीबी जिसे बोलते हैं. तो वो क्या है, वो आपको एक बार गो थ्रू करना पड़ेगा. मल्टी थ्रेडिंग होता है, कंकरेंट एग्जीक्यूशंस एंड पैरेलल एग्जीक्यूशन में. सो आई विल जस्ट टेल यू कंकरेंस एंड पैरेलल एग्जीक्यूशन में. लाइक कंकरेंसी इज दैट कंसर्न्ड विद मैनेजिंग access to a shared state from the different threads, wherever the parallelism is concerned with utilization, that the concurrency means that an application is making a progress or a more than one task at the same time. The parallelism means that an application splits it into and takes up into the smaller subtasks, and which can be processed in parallel for the instance of multiple CPUs at an exact same time. And for the reference to the that how is the system call handled by the system here, or the we can say that the critical section. So here that the system call provided an interface to an operating system services, and the system call is a technique by which the program is executing it by the users made, and that can be request for the kernel services, and the system can call to explicit the request in a kernel as well, kernel board via the software interrupt. And when a user mode process invokes a system call, the CPU switches to the kernel mode and starts the execution of that kernel function. And making a system call, it's like making a special kind of a procedure call. On once only the system call enters the kernels, and the procedure call does not enter to the kernel here. With regard of that, the PCB here, that process control block, where when a process changes the share, the operating system must update the information in the process and the control block here. And the process control block that maintain other information which is not included in the PCB block diagram, where we had mentioned in the unit when we had discussed that. and that information includes the CPU scheduling as well as the file management, input output management information when process is created, and hardware registers and flags values are set to be the that loader or the linker that I had mentioned you here. When they had asked you about the verified multi-threading, so you can just tell that process that creates the numbers of multiple threads, so these threads can run simultaneously, and in a multi-threaded application each task can be performed by the separate thread. If one thread is executing a long process, it does not make the some application well for it to finish. And when they ask you about the difference between, yeah, differentiate between the concurrency and the parallelism execution, as I told you before also. Okay, these were the things. And what do they, if they ask you about what do you understand by the what do you mean by the kernel? So the kernel is a program that contributes the central acts core of the computer operating system, and it has a complete control over everything that occurs in the system. And the kernel is a main program of operating system, and it controls the hardware, CPU, memory, and the disk, hard disk, and as well as the network card, that is NIC, that what we are saying. In terms of that, the another question what they can ask you is about grouping and counting. So grouping, you can say that for the grouping, what an SRTF CPU जो कि मैंने आपको बताया था, how to find out SRTF, and how to find out these things. Grouping, for grouping case, we can say that the first 5 blocks containing that address of block, and for the first n minus 1 of the block that is actually free, and the last block of that container of the address will be the free block here. When all the blocks of the group has been allocated, then the use of that block that can be held by the pointer, and then because of the group method, this address of the large numbers of the free block can be found quickly. And for with respect to the counting, if I'm talking about, so yes, it keeps the address of the first free block of the number of n of free contiguous blocks that follows the first block, and each entry in the free space less than consists of the disk address and the count, of course. And for average waiting time, average turnaround time, as I told you in the class session, then we had discussed those. And with regard of that, all the possible question I had made you complete. And we are in time of they can ask you different types of operating systems, so you can just what are the different types of operating system that has been asked in the 10 marks possible question here, then the section B here most of the time. So that in 2016 they had also asked you about the batch system. So they are the operating system. That first is the batch system. In the batch system here, you can see that for that a batch system process collections of jobs that cause a batch, and batch is a sequence of the user's job, and job is a predefined sequences of commands, programs, and the data that are combined into the singular unit here. And in reference to that, each job in a batch independent of the job in a batch here, and a user can define a job control specification of the constructing a file with the sequence of commands as well. In regard of that, that jobs with similar needs were batched together to speed up the processing, and the card reads and tape drivers are the input devices in that batch system, and that output batch devices are the tapes, drivers, card punches, and the line printers as well. The second is your multi-programming operating system. In the multi-programming operating system, that CPU remains idle in the batch system. At any time, either CPU and or input output device was idled in a batch system. To keep the CPU busy more than the one program, that job or must be loaded for the execution. It increases the CPU utilization. So the multi-programming increases the CPU utilization as well. With regard of this, that resource management is the main aim of the multi-programming multi-programming operating system, and that file system, command procedures, and input output control system that are translated area are the essential component of a single user operating system. And whereas in the multi-programming operating system, that divides a transient area to store the multiple programs and provide the resource management to the operating system as well. In regard of the time sharing, if I'm talking about the time sharing, this is the third type of operating system, the time sharing system. And the time sharing system is also called the multitasking operating system. It is a logical extensions of the multi-programming operating system as well. In this, the user interaction with the program is possibly in a time-sharing operating system that during the execution of a program, user interacts directly with the program and supplying the information to the program. And multitasking means that the computer can work with more than one program at a time. And for example, that a user could be working with information from one database on a screen, analyzing data, where while the computer is something sorting information from the another database, while the Excel sheet is performing the calculation on a separate worksheet. Many users share the computer system simultaneously in the time sharing operating system, and the time sharing systems are multi-programming that uses the multi-programming and the CPU scheduling. Each user has at least one separate program in memory as well. The fourth type of an operating system we have is a distributed system. In the distributed system depends on the networking for their operation. Distributed operating system runs on and control the resources of multiple machines, that it provides resources sharings across the boundaries of a single compute that compute system, and it looks like to users to like single machine operating system, and that distributing the operating system owns the whole network and makes it look like a virtual uniprocessor or maybe a virtual multiprocessor. Where in the terms of the distributed system, a distributed operating system is one that looks to its user like an ordinary operating system that but runs on the multiple independent CPU as well. In regard of that, the last one we have is a fifth one, and the fifth one we have a real-time system. This is the fifth type of operating system here. In the terms of this, we can say that the time that constraints in the key parameter is a real-time system which controls synchronous systems such as robots, satellites, air traffic control, and hydroelectric dams. And when users gives an input to the system, it must process with the time and that limit, and that result is sent back. A real-time system falls if it does not gives the result within the time limit. As well as real-time systems are of two types, that is of hard type and the soft real type that I had told you about. The critical task to be completed within the time limit, if I'm talking about. So here with the time limit is hard and time critical delay, and the system is fixed and time bounded. Existing generally purpose operating system does not support the hard real-time system functions, and real-time task control cannot keep waiting for a longer without locating kernels here. And in the soft real-time system, that is restrictive type, soft real type cannot guarantee that it will be able to meet a deadline under all conditions. Examples of the soft real-time system is a digital telephone and a digital audio. In the real-time operating system, the user priority scheduling algorithm is to meet the responses requirements of the real-time application as well. In regard of that, all these what we have to discuss, they can ask you many more things related to this. Even they are ask you about the related to the spooling and as well as the advantages of spooling. So with regard of that, you have to answer only the catching they can ask you, and regard of the spooling they can ask you, and they can ask you about the error handling as well. So these were the all important topics reference to this. एंड फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल, अगर आप हमारे चैनल फर्स्ट टाइम देख रहे हो या अभी तक आपने हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है, इट्स अ ह्यूज रिक्वेस्ट कि आप हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करो, सो दैट हम जो भी वीडियोस डालें वो आपके पास सबसे पहले पहुंचे। एंड सेकेंडली, अगर आपको हमारा वीडियो अच्छा लगे तो प्लीज़ हमारे वीडियो को लाइक, शेयर और सब्सक्राइब करो। थैंक यू।